shouldn't have said that no, she's around.
Sorry.
I mean, if we don't know who the audience is going to be, I mean, conceptually we could just ignore the audience. Why don't we just do what we're interested in and pull people along with that? I mean, that's one way of designing it then, because if you try and, I mean, one of the things that came out of that exercise was the variety of people who might be on this course. And then the idea of then starting to design around them, their expectations, becomes incredibly difficult. Unless you pick a particular audience, you say, well, these are our primary stakeholders, let's go with these. Because we don't actually have people necessarily, I was saying, who are there of the core, who are going to be accredited, because you always have that thing to touchstone, is to say, well, we've got these people who are accredited, so that's all the people on the edge of this course, we don't really care if that goes wrong, as long as the people in the centre don't. We might not have that, so that makes our design very tricky. So it could be that we just switch that around and say, well, what are we as experts, and what resources do we have, which are limited, that we can bring easily to this, which would make an interesting curriculum course. And if we say we've got thousands there with variable participation, we just pull people through at least our interest and our passion for the areas that we're doing or want to do. And that would be enough, I think, to motivate people to be involved with it, rather than trying to make something that maybe none of us particularly want to teach on. So that's one way of...
In a sense, are you saying that essentially what we'll be doing is just putting our learning process out in the open?
Yeah, because that's what we're interested in, and that's what...
No, I don't think it's putting our learning process.
Well,
it's not quite that. I mean, I think we want to take people on a journey, don't we? That's kind of what education is. And we have a sense of what might be an interesting and valuable journey for people, and we've got to be fairly explicit about what we think that is at the start, in order to be fair to the people who sign up. We've got to say something.
But there is an assumption that people are going to start at the beginning and go through to the end, you see, whereas Dave was talking about drive-by activities. And one of the things about a MOOC is that people will dip in and out based on whether they think that week's activity is of interest or relevant to them. So I don't think a criteria for success is how many people went all the way through, because I think if you take the hobbyist kind of approach, they're going to be driven by specific interests in specific parts of it.
Right, but is it informal learning, or are we talking about a course? A course, a MOOC, is a course. It has an intention with respect to the contract it has with the people participating in it. It's not.
But there isn't
it's
a
not a
contract.
newspaper.
That's the thing. There isn't a contract. It's
the strange thing about MOOCs is not all of them are massive, not all of them are open, not all of them are online, and not all of them are courses. I see them as a separate class of things to the course, because they're not actually about completion, they're not about getting to the end of something, they're about the process.
I mean, it's not really a course.
Well, whatever the semantics might be, I mean, we were talking in terms of, we were talking about the idea of it being more like a club or a society.
Well, that's a different kind of thing.
Well, it might be. I mean, that would be why it would be useful to discuss.
Yes,
I think that actually, I mean, we are designing this as a course which has a start and an end. And I think, personally, I do hope that people do stick throughout it and do go with us through the journey. And it's also a journey for me. I mean, one of my main motivations is to learn from the people in this room. So for me, it's a journey that I intend to go through with you, and I hope that other people will follow. Now, I acknowledge the fact that some people will be dipping in and out, and that we have to accommodate that form of participation as well. But I wouldn't say completion is not a measure of success. I think that for me, having a good percentage of people who actually start the MOOC and go through the whole journey would be a measure of success. Having other people who dip in and out and still find it useful is another measure of success.
But so that's an interesting, because to me that's a design assumption. That people will, the point of it is that they start at the beginning and go through the end, or even that there is a beginning and an end. And so then that brings up the question, why would they want to do that? And answering that why gets you a long way towards how you design this thing. So for me as a participant, I'm like, why would I do week 2 if I'm not that interested in it?
Because I think that the MOOC is about learning design, right? Learning design is a process which you don't complete in a single week. So it might be that you think you have a fairly good idea of learning design, but you just don't really. You heard about the ecology of resources, or you heard about the learning designer tool, and you just want to fill in that gap in your knowledge, and you come to that week. Well, it might be that you're in a position which requires you to do learning design as part of your practice, and you want to build up a skill. And if you want to build up a skill, then I think you need to engage with the process and not just with a small snapshot of it. So that's why for me, I mean,
makes it different from being a collaborative society.
That isn't the point.
So you're taking some responsibility for helping people go somewhere. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, can you not marry the two and have a course that you can dip in and out, so that you build it, so that it allows those who are interested to go from beginning to end and really learn something, and those who are just playing to come in and out,
It will be that.
Exactly.
People will certainly dip in and out, there's no question about that.
Exactly.
But if there is a narrative to the whole thing, then it's possible for people to dip in and out, but there's also the possibility that people can actually build something.
But you just used the N word there. So
Which word?
narrative.
Yeah.
So it's clearly that's the design direction you're coming from. Is that this will have a narrative. It will have a coherent overall structure. And if you start at the beginning and do every session and end up at the end, then you will have learnt a certain amount of something. That's what you're saying, that there's a kind of a process there, and that incoming participants would rightly have an expectation that if they engage with the whole of it, then they'd end up having gained a certain amount of expertise or knowledge.
Don't forget that what technology gives you is the opportunity to learn a constructed narrative, so that's
Sure,
something we've read about some time ago.
What I'm trying to get at is that there are
a structured design, of course. I mean, if you're thinking of the idea of actually allowing learning constructive narratives, learner-led the direction of the course, you've got to be open to the fact that the kind of narrative and design we carefully construct might actually be completely trashed in week 2. I think.
This is the point that Stephen was raising earlier on, is how responsive can we be in negotiating the curriculum and the way the curriculum is being taught. And it's an opportunity to have a negotiated curriculum, which is great. But it's within some constraints of what we're capable of actually offering. I mean, it's got a particular
then again,
team,
I was involved in a MOOC because the participants got together and invited me to give a talk, but it wasn't actually part of the curriculum, if you see what I mean. So there's all kinds of blurry, fuzzy edges around it. So you can have really, really great side effects. I think my point is that the activities we did this morning were very open, but actually there's numerous design assumptions in the room which haven't surfaced yet, and it's kind of handy to get a handle on those before we drive into the afternoon, or as part of the afternoon perhaps.
But that's this discussion now.
We're
just having this discussion.
But it's kind of fun coming at forcing them out of the room, isn't it? So
I mean, it's very difficult to analyse the object of the MOOC, to say that it is chaotic and unknown, and then try and design for that. I mean, obviously, what we should imply from that is we will do what we do, and it will be unique in some form, based around what we decide to teach and who that audience. So yes, we need to be reactive, but I think that's just something we can.
We've got to be able to
all
design in responsiveness.
But I think I mean, one way of designing responsiveness is not to accredit it in some respects. We don't assess it.
We're not saying there's going to be a specific.
Then that's one way of leaving some openness, because it means we don't have to track people. We take off one of the management burdens, which is one of the kind of risks that Isha raised as well at the beginning. So some of the design decisions might be we don't accredit, or we look at participation levels as a way of accreditation. I mean, I've used that before.
But I'm kind of interested, and this might be to one side, I'm kind of interested in what people would imagine this looks like if it's a success. you know, what are the, I'm going to use a horrible phrase, what are the criteria for success?
Well, I mean,
for a project like
what
this.
Sting just said. You know,
Yeah.
there are going to be people who are contributing things. The learners on this MOOC are going to be, some of them are going to be really good, and they're going to be telling us a thing or two. Those people could be contributing things. We've got it on here. You know, it's the student outputs, contributes to the resources, and those resources then become resources for a later course. So one of the measures of success could be that this spawns a further kind of MOOC,
Yeah.
further development. That's one of the things we could do.
Let's just try to open up, because I think it's a very interesting and important discussion, but so far it's been between 3 people, so I'd like to get more people to...
It's about right percentage.
Peter, pick it on your random.
Okay, the only thing I was going to comment on, and I think, I mean, it's 2 things. One, you've got this amazing world of possibility that you know, you could do this, we could do this. Obviously, there needs to be some structure to narrow that down to make it a workable project. So, you know, blue sky comes down to a, you know, workable project plan. But that's just the project management discipline in me talking. What keeps going through my head is about when we talk about people doing this and getting involved in this and participating, there needs to be some sort of organisational or institutional buy-in into it as well. So out of that, because the institution's either going to commit time and resources on behalf of their staff to do it, time and resources on behalf of their staff to facilitate it, be involved with it from this side as well. So coming from an institution where time and resources are extraordinarily precious, I'm sure they're precious everywhere else, but you know, a post-92 tends to be very, very lean in the way it does these things. I know my senior management would say, well, what's our staff going to get out of this? And if you said, well, they're going to participate, they're going to interact with other people, wonderful. Is there a certification or a accreditation that comes with this? Does it contribute towards HEA status? Does it help us achieve a KPI? And I'm not, by any shape of the imagination, a person who only talks about those kind of things, but I think in the instance of thinking about designing this and where the audience might lie, if we talk about a big body of the institutional audience in the UK and in other countries as well, though that kind of very time precious, very KPI driven, very sort of output driven academic is a solid part of a potential audience. And so therefore institutional buy-in is a fairly fundamental part of that.
Okay, but if you can't get institutional buy-in, there's a risk element, then what do? Well, you then have to redesign it where it's not time. You know, you've a lot of words there that would seem to me about control, and the opposite to what a MOOC probably is or should be. KPIs, time, pressure. I mean, those are putting me off the course already. When I've designed it. I mean, I'd be looking at something where the individual's motivation to do this was balanced by the amount of time they might have to. Because I don't think we're going to get institutional buy-in in that kind of way. So I do know what you mean as well, where you want top management to say, yeah, this is good. I'm not sure we're looking at that for this kind of course. It's not a formal accredited course that we're building here, where we're going to go to university and say, can you make sure you sign your staff up to this? No, we're opening it up to everyone. So we're looking at individuals and individual motivations. This is what we did. We didn't group it into institutions here in groups. So I'm not sure whether we should be designing, or it's an important design consideration to take a stand on that point where we place ourselves.
There's a lot of people talking about KPIs and kind of business models with MOOCs. There's not really anybody that actually has one. I mean, if you saw the stuff yesterday in the Chronicle on the Coursera contract, they're quite kind of open about the fact they've not got a business model, they're experimenting, they're making it up as they go along. So in some respects this is much more like a startup than a course. It's actually getting all the people using the service and then afterwards thinking about what we're going to do with them to get some benefit out of it rather than just starting with the benefit, I think.
I think we need to try to balance, you know, obviously we can't really even start to pretend that we're going to give people any sort of formal accreditation.
No, I wouldn't suggest that.
Or give institutions kind of very tangible, clearly measurable outputs that they can see the sort of the direct benefits from. On the other hand, if we're asking people to engage with us for, you know, to work hard for 10 weeks, we need to say, okay, what will they get out of that? And hopefully what will the institution that allows them to invest this time get out of this? So that's probably the kind of question that we should start with in the afternoon. I mean, some of these things do come out from the exercises it did in terms of, say, the targets that we think people would bring with them, and can we or can we not address these targets? We might want to narrow it down to a subset of those targets, which we say, okay, that's what we're committed to. I think there's, we have to negotiate our plates on the scale between the sort of very kind of extreme rhizomatic approach, which kind of grows and spans and reconnects in every other direction very organically, and a sort of a very structured, a single narrative approach, and we need to find our way somewhere on that.
From a design point of view, things that tend to be successful unofficially are things that you can engage with in 5 minutes chunks, generally, at least for part of the time, because then you can do them at work even if you're not supposed to. Because one of the reasons why Twitter's so popular is because you can successfully engage with it in 20-30 seconds. So I think that one of the design ways through the problem that we're discussing here is to make sure that large sections of the course it's possible to engage in not necessarily via Twitter, but in relatively short chunks of time. Because if you go to your boss and say, I need 3 hours at a time to engage in this course, that's a thing. But if you spread those 3 hours out in 5 minute chunks across 2 days, then nobody ever questions you.
So here's really, I think, the kind of this sort of brings me to maybe formulating a design challenge in the sense that, can we build this MOOC out of these sort of 5 minute chunks, which if you actually string them together, you end up with a body of knowledge. So then you could, and again, imagine the exercises that we did, the ecology of resources. You had these short exercises, right? And you might be able to do each one of them separately and gain some insight into your own design practice by that. But you might walk through the whole lot of them and then gain something that's more than the sum of the parts.
But equally, I would say that we need to accommodate deeper thinking on issues raised. So I think small chunks are extremely good because they allow that sort of sample in. Yeah, but exactly. So a range of different levels of depth that you could provide to people who would participate would allow for the deep thinking that is inherent in the complex issues of design, but as well satisfy those opportunities to engage in brief moments when you can, in the sort of spaces in between, when you can do some learning as well.
Okay, so I'll just leave you with one more question before we go to lunch. The idea of, on the one hand, having sort of very small chunks of activity as you can do them independently or string them together and go deeper, that's one challenge. But then on another dimension, there's a social dimension. So there's the tension between walking through it on your own or working with a group and a community. Right? And again, my experience of, my limited experience of MOOCs is that they are successful when they engender a kind of a sense of community. You're not walking on your own, you're on this journey with other people. I was hoping to really structure this MOOC around, teams working together on a project. Right? Now, that I think is in quite strong tension with small chunks that you do at your own time, at your own speed. So, can we sort of resolve this tension? Do we want to, or that's? But again, let's have lunch and come back.